Hello and welcome to our 5 St Andrews Hill short video on our top tips for virtual and remote hearings. My name's Tessa Nejranowski and I'm the Marketing and Business Development Manager at 5 St Andrews Hill, or 5SAH.
Hi, I'm Gemma Lindfield. I'm a Family and Extradition Barrister at 5SAH.
Hello, I'm Hilary, Lennox, and I'm specialised in international family law at 5SAH.
And I'm just going to put a little warning before we start that we're all using our own remote Wi-Fi, so just bear with us if we have a tiny bit of lagging. So I just want to talk to you, Gemma, about practical preparations before you start a virtual hearing.
So the day before, so if I'm doing a video hearing, I really think about the space that I want to inhabit and how that will then be effectively my part of the courtroom. And so I ensure that I've got my devices in the right position, and I go on to test a Zoom conference to see that it is as it should be. And then I just think about, if I was going to court, what would I put in my bag to take to court, and ensure that I've got all of those items at easy reach. And then it struck me that obviously court, you have a water jug and that's placed there for you. So I ensured I had some water, because when you're cross-examining someone and you're talking a great deal, it's useful to have some water.
And did that make you feel more comfortable?
It did. It made me feel like I was in court as much as possible.
And Hilary, what about you? What's your virtual setup?
Essentially the same as Gemma, but just to familiarise yourself with the software, because just to fiddle around with it a few days before, or just familiarise yourself with it, because if something goes wrong, you don't want to be spending ages trying to fix it, and obviously there's going to be lots of things that potentially could go wrong. However, yeah, just fiddle around with it, get familiar with it, and get your space set up and be ready to go promptly.
And what about your screen setup? How many screens do you have at your desk?
I have 3 screens. Our iPhones are pretty expensive pieces of equipment, and actually the cameras on those are brilliant. And I do use my phone camera quite a lot if I need to. But I use my iPad for the bundles generally, to access the trial bundles or e-bundles, and then I'm also taking notes in my iMac or my MacBook. So it's yeah, it is 3 pieces of software. Maybe I'm being a bit but it's essential for how I do it. I mean, I generally have both my iPad and my my MacBook in court with me anyway, so, and my phone.
And another top tip that I found out the hard way was plug your laptop in, or make sure you've got enough battery.
Yeah.
And then what about participating in a virtual hearing? How does that take place?
So it depends what the platform is. So if it's a telephone hearing, then the court will generally telephone you, or you get given a number and then you have to enter a PIN code to access the courtroom. I set up a Zoom hearing for a final hearing in an inherent jurisdiction case in the High Court, and I set up the Zoom hearing and I used the case number as the title for the Zoom hearing. I emailed the parties in the court the link, and then in a separate email I sent the passwords to the meeting, and then I set up a waiting room so that when everyone entered, they entered into a waiting room where you can't speak to anyone, you're just effectively in a holding area. And then when the judge entered promptly at 10 o'clock, I released everyone into the main area. And that's how I did it.
And what about you, Hilary?
I've had the judges or whoever's been organising the virtual hearings contact us with the links. I haven't actually set up the links like Gemma has, or done the waiting rooms. However, we do a lot of negotiation between the parties prior to the hearing taking place. So we would be using our emails and our mobile phones, discussing the cases, narrowing down the issues for the hearing. and then we would let the judge's clerk know we're ready, and then the judge would then come into the courtroom. We would all log in, and then the judge would arrive in. So thankfully it has been organised by the judge's clerk, and also by whoever's organising in a private FGR, for example, with the FGR judge.
And talking of judges, how do judges enter, and do you still stand?
Well, we all stood in one case where we had a High Court case, and the judge's clerk said, "All rise," and we all stood up. The new rules, the 3rd of April rules from Mr. Justice, or guidance from Mr. Justice MacDonald, has now said that we don't have to stand when the judge enters or leaves the courtroom. But that was quite amusing that day, because no one really knew what they were doing.
It can be quite strange when you're on the telephone hearing, because you're brought into the room and then obviously they're adding other participants and waiting for the judge to speak and knowing whether you should be indicating that you're there, but it does announce that you've joined the meeting. So I just tend to stay quiet until I'm spoken to.
Yeah.
And talking of that, have you always had a court clerk, or has it just been the judge organising it? And how do you deal with that if it's just the judge?
Well, one of my hearings, it was just a judge. I think in the beginning the judge's clerks were there because the courts hadn't the lockdown hadn't fully taken place. So some of the hearings took place beginning or at the end of March. However, the judges have been organising some of the meetings as well. And I think you've had more experience of that, Gemma, haven't you?
Yes, I think it does seem there seemed to be a period of time when it was very much the case that some judges were being very proactive and reaching out to the parties to find out what was going on, and setting up the arrangements. So, for example, in the Zoom meeting, that was initiated by contact from the judge via his clerk, requesting that we do that.
So everyone's just being quite proactive and pragmatic to get things moving.
Yeah,
in the
really.
most part.
And hearing bundles, are they? I presume they all have to be e-bundles, and how does that all come to you?
So they are e-bundles, and in fact, the guidance says that they shouldn't be paper because of the risk of transmission. And so the rules seem to have been relaxed. So the bundle has to be with the court a day before, generally. So that has allowed people more time in order to make up the e-bundles if they're not working electronically. I think lots of solicitors do work electronically, but not all do. So I've found in some of my cases it's been a learning curve for the solicitor that they have to make an e-bundle, and telling them don't lodge anything with the court. Practically, I can see there might be issues when a new case lands on a solicitor's desk or direct access client instructs you, because they will probably have paper documents, and then you're looking at the capacity of them to scan those in. You can scan on your phone. It takes a little while. I guess it's just going to have to be something that someone does in order to ensure that papers are with the court. And
then the recordings of the hearing, how does that happen, and do they have to be recorded?
So in the case I did over Zoom, it was my responsibility to record the Zoom meeting. That ideally should be recorded to your device, but for some reason, even though I set it to record to my device, it recorded to the Zoom cloud, which isn't prohibited, it's just the second option. And that is still the possession of the court. I'm not allowed to listen to that. I've just left it in the cloud where it is. It does concern me because, of course, if it is deleted for any reason, then obviously I'm responsible for that. I thought about whether I could perhaps download it onto something, but then I thought, no, I didn't want to do that because it would expose me to some suggestion that I might have tampered with it or I'd listened to it. So I've left it where it is. At the moment, there isn't a designated person or persons that will take possession of that from me. So they will get the link with a password, and once they've confirmed they've got it, then obviously I will delete it. And it is an aspect that's a little peculiar, and it isn't. I find it an incredible responsibility because it was a final hearing, evidence was heard, and I'm the custodian of it at the moment. I know that the court are rolling out their own bespoke video conferencing platform next week, the court service. Hopefully that will then mean that Zoom and all the other platforms won't be applicable if their systems fit for purpose. But when it comes to telephone hearings, they're using BT for the public sector, and that has an automatic record function, and they already have a mechanism in which they get the recording to the correct department.
So hopefully the court will take the lead on the recording from now on, or in a week's time.
Yes.
And Hilary, can you tell me about the mute and the chat button and how those work in remote hearings?
Well, technically, the mute button is always supposed to be on when you're not speaking in the court, which will then hide any background noise or any unexpected visitors, etc. The chat button is below, where you can interact with the various participants. But I don't suggest you use that if you want to speak to your instructing solicitors or clients, etc., because whatever is said on the chat button will come out in the overall recording. So if you do want to communicate with your instructing solicitors and take instructions throughout the hearing, use your own emails, your own mobile phone or chats that way. I don't suggest using the chat button in the software or Zoom or whatever.
So if you need to communicate privately with your client or instructing solicitor, you've been using other modes like WhatsApp and emails and those sorts of things?
Yeah, just your regular mobile phone as well and email, yeah.
And you've mentioned a couple of platforms that you've been using, Zoom, BT conferencing. Are there any others that have been in use?
I've been using Lifesize as well, which is really good. Well, it was really good when we used it. Skype for Business seems to be the general one that the High Court are using. However, the courts are rolling out their own software. I think as early as next week. I read some of this morning. So that will, I think, take over all the different softwares out there. But I think the general ones are Skype, BT for the phone hearings, Lifesize, and Microsoft Teams, I think I've heard as well. And Gemma, you may know some more.
The first telephone hearing I did, just prior to the lockdown, the solicitor for the applicant arranged it, and it was via Powwow Now. But the court was sitting, so the judge was in court, and so I assume it was recorded on the recording system.
Mm. And then, Gemma, can you tell me about whether it's possible to have a fully contested hearing virtually, and what types of hearings are possible?
So it is technically possible to have a final hearing via Zoom, although there has been recent guidance this week about the parties should be in agreement, and I can see that going forward there may be parties who won't agree to that, and they may agree for tactical reasons. They may disagree for tactical reasons, not to do with the technology. Obviously, face-to-face hearings are preferable. I mean, I did conduct a final hearing. I cross-examined witnesses, and it was manageable. Would it be manageable across the board? I don't think so. What is important is that we have the capacity to keep cases moving along. And so directions hearings can be heard. I mean, although I did a directions hearing last week pro bono, and one of the participants had some level of capacity issue, and so being emailed a position statement during the hearing, it just wasn't possible for her to consider the document and participate in hearings. So we've had to be adjourned for a couple of weeks so that she can have someone sit down with her and go through the document. I think we need to be alive to all of the participants and ensure that it is fair.
So it needs to be on a case-by-case basis.
Very much so.
And Hilary, what about anyone that's got any hearing difficulties, do you know if there are any measures in place to counteract that?
Yes, there are. There is something called the CART, the CART, which it can be translated into several languages, and it comes up on your screen as a transcript. So that would assist people with any hearing difficulties and could be very beneficial for various people. However, you may need to ask or get permission from the court before you start using it, as it is essentially a separate transcript.
Right. And then, have you got any concluding thoughts of positives and negatives of your experience from virtual and remote hearings? Gemma?
Well,
I'm sorry, Hilary, you go first.
From my perspective, I think it's remarkable how the family bar has come together and the collegiality of the bar. We managed to turn virtual almost overnight, which is very impressive. Also, everyone seems to have got up to speed so quickly with the software, and not only that, but the court systems are now coming out with their own software literally as soon as next week. So I think the family bar should be commended for the speed in which it's come together and the collegiality of the bar in which to implement all of this as well. And the judges managing to do their lists of hearings under a remote session is really very impressive.
I agree. I think it has been impressive across the board as a general. Sorry, I'm going to start again. I agree. I think it has worked generally, although there are reports, and it's happened to me on a couple of occasions, of cases being taken out of the list with no reason, no attempt for it to be remotely, and no new dates, which is awful if you've got a client who's very anxious about what is the most important thing to them, their family. And so I hope that was just a teething problem at the beginning, and that the court system could come up to speed and work out in advance whether hearings can go ahead remotely. And I do see that starting to happen, but I think it's really great that we're keeping the justice system moving, because my real concern at the beginning of this was that there would be a backlog that would be effectively pushing off for a couple of months' time, and then obviously during lockdown, family situations are still going to arise. Arguably, they could arise even more, and then you're potentially creating an absolutely chaotic situation in a few months' time, which we have to avoid, because it's vital that anyone who is in a situation right now, whether it's a vulnerable adult or concerns over a child, that they know that the system's up and running, and that it will be effective and it will protect them. And I hope that message is getting out there.
Thank you, Gemma. Thank you, Hilary. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Take care.